You have been a general for 23 years and your sword has never failed you. That is not a metaphor. You're not speaking about courage or lineage or the will of your ancestors, though all of those things are also true. You mean the sword itself, the weight of it in your hand, the particular angle of the draw, the way your body learned over 2 decades to move with it as if the steel were a continuation of your own skeleton. You are 44 years old. You have fought 12 campaigns. You have held a line at Toba Fushimi while conscripts broke and ran around you, and the sword was there. You have executed men who deserved it, and some who probably did not, and the sword was there. It has been sharpened so many times that the blade is slightly thinner than it was when your father placed it in your hands at 17. And this thinning feels like history itself, like the slow passage of everything that has mattered. It is 1877. You are standing on a hillside in Kagoshima looking down at the government troops below, and you know something this morning that you did not allow yourself to know yesterday. The rifles have already won. You brought 6,000 men here with swords. The men below have Gatling guns. You understood this intellectually for 2 years. You did not understand it in your body until now, and the difference between those two kinds of understanding is what this day is going to cost you. The rifle arrived in Japan before you were born. That is the first thing. You did not sleep through its introduction. You watched it. You trained with early models in your 30s, understood the reload time, understood the range, built a mental model of where the weapon had limits and where the sword could still close the gap. That mental model was accurate in 1853. It has not been updated. What you did not track, because you were fighting a civil war and administering a domain and grieving the old order, was the speed at which the reload time collapsed. What took 40 seconds became 20. What took 20 became 8. What took 8 became continuous, a Gatling barrel that does not stop, that does not breathe, that does not tire, that does not feel the weight of the man it is killing. You built your entire tactical understanding around the pause after the shot. You trained your men to survive the first volley and close the distance before the second. There is no pause now. The second volley is already happening, while the first volley is still in the air. You did not update the model because updating the model would have required you to conclude something you were not ready to conclude. The sword is not a weapon anymore. It is a ceremony, and you have brought 6,000 ceremonies to a gunfight. Understand what you are actually mourning, because it is not what you think. You are not mourning the sword. Swords are metal. You are mourning the entire human system that the sword made possible. The years of training that made a man worth something that money could not buy. The hierarchy that made that worth legible. The code that gave the hierarchy meaning. The meaning that gave your life its shape. For 500 years, it took a decade to make a man dangerous. A decade of practice, discipline, refinement, error, correction. That decade was the thing that separated the samurai from the conscript, the trained from the desperate, the man who had earned his place in a line from the man who had been handed a position and told to hold it. The rifle ended that. Not immediately. You told yourself for years that skill still mattered, that the trained eye, the calm body, the man who had stood in 100 fights and learned how not to panic, these things still counted. They count for something. They do not count for enough. A farmer's son can be taught to load and fire a Murata rifle in 3 weeks. 3 weeks against your decade. The weapon did not just change war. It changed what kind of man war required. And in changing that, it changed everything you used to know about what you were for. There was a conversation 2 years ago you have not stopped thinking about. A younger officer, 30 years old, westernized in the way that made you quietly furious. The trim suit, the studied casualness, the English words dropped into Japanese sentences like punctuation. He said something at dinner that you dismissed as the arrogance of a man who had not yet fought anything serious. He said the future of Japanese warfare was logistics, not courage. Supply chains, rail lines, the ability to move men and material faster than the enemy could adapt. Courage, he said, was what you needed when the systems failed. When the systems worked, courage was beside the point. You called this dishonorable. You meant it. But you have been standing on this hill for 4 hours watching the government supply lines move with a steadiness that your forces cannot match. And the officer's words will not leave you alone. He was not disrespecting courage. He was locating it. He was saying that courage matters at the human level, and that wars are now decided at the system level. And these are 2 different layers of reality that are very difficult to reconcile because the men who have to fight in the system are still human and still need to believe that what they bring to the field matters. He was not wrong. You could not afford to hear it then. You can hear it now. That is its own kind of defeat, absorbing the truth after it can no longer help you. The men behind you know. Not all of them, not intellectually, not in the way you now know it, but in the body, in the place where fear lives below thought. They know that something has changed about the shape of this fight. They are good men. They are brave men, some of them the best fighters you have ever stood beside, men who have trained since childhood, men whose presence in a line would have been decisive in any battle fought in any century before this one. They are not afraid of dying. A samurai is not afraid of dying. This is not theater. This is not performance. It is the actual psychological truth of how a man who has lived inside a code long enough comes to hold his own life. The willingness to die is real, but there is a particular quality to the fear of dying for nothing, which is different from the willingness to die for something, and that quality is in the air behind you this morning, and no one is naming it because naming it would require you all to say aloud the thing none of you are saying. The rifles have already decided this. We have not accepted it yet. Our bodies are here. The decision was made somewhere else by people who counted barrels and ammunition and reload rates, and it went against us before the first shot was fired today. This is what it feels like to be the last of something. Not dramatic, not mythic. That is what you could not have predicted. How ordinary the specific moment of ending feels from inside it. You expected, if you thought about it at all, that the end of an era would carry its own announcement. Some quality of light, some weight in the air, some sensation in the body that would mark the crossing. There's nothing like that. There's the hillside. There's the grass. There's the sound of the government guns in the valley below, steady as machinery because they are machinery. And there is the smell of gunpowder that has no longer anything noble in it. Just chemistry, just pressure and heat and a small piece of metal moving very fast through air toward a specific point in space that may or may not be occupied by a human body. You have fought in battles where you believed, genuinely believed, that the quality of a man's training and the depth of his commitment were the deciding variables. Those beliefs were not wrong for the world that produced them. They are wrong now. The world changed faster than the belief, and this is not a personal failure. Men in every era have held beliefs that were accurate until suddenly they weren't, and most of them never found out. They just lost and were confused about why. You are not confused. That is both better and worse than you expected. Your father told you something when he gave you the sword. You were 17, impatient, already good enough to feel dangerous, and not yet good enough to feel what that meant. He said, "The sword does not make you a samurai. The sword shows what the practice made." You could not have been made by the sword because the sword is only metal. What made you was every morning before dawn, every correction, every moment of failure followed by return. He was right. He was completely right. And what you understand now, standing here at 44 with the rifle fire beginning to intensify below, is that this principle does not save you. The thing that was made by practice and return and decades of refinement and genuine sacrifice, it is real. It is in your body, and it is in the bodies of the men behind you, and it is not nothing, and it is not theater, and no revision of history will make it nothing, and it will not stop a Gatling gun. Both of these things are true at the same time. You spent your life building something real that the world has stopped requiring. This is not the tragedy you thought it was going to be. It is smaller and more precise, and in some ways harder than a tragedy, because a tragedy has a shape, and a shape gives you somewhere to put the weight. This is just a fact. The world moved. You were standing still inside a practice that had become, without ceremony, without announcement, without anyone deciding to end it, history. You draw the sword, not because you believe it will decide this. You drew it because it is what the body knows, because 23 years of practice do not stop being true because they have become insufficient, because the men behind you need to see someone who is not afraid of what is coming, and you are genuinely not afraid. And this is perhaps the last thing the sword ever gave you. The capacity to approach the end of everything without flinching, to stand inside an honest reckoning and not look away. The blade catches the morning light the way it always has. Your hands are steady. That is real. That matters. That will not change what happens next. You have always known that the warrior's task was not to win every battle. It was to meet what comes with the full weight of what you have made of yourself. The rifles are firing. The distance is closing. You have been a general for 23 years. You're not going to stop now. The world does not announce when it has moved past you. That is the cruelest part. There is no proclamation, no ceremony, no official moment where someone of authority looks at what you have spent your life building and says, "This was real, this mattered, and now it is finished." The world simply continues to operate, and the thing you were trained for stops appearing in it. And for a long time, you can mistake the absence for a temporary gap, a lull before the next deployment of what you know. You can maintain this for years. Many men do. The gap between when something ends and when you accept that it has ended is where a certain kind of grief lives. Not the grief of loss, which has a specific object, but the grief of obsolescence, which has no object you can name, which arrives as a vague wrongness, a sense that you are working very hard in the direction of nothing, that the engine of your effort is pointed at a destination that has been quietly removed from the map. You have felt this for 2 years and named it loyalty and principle. It was also grief. You could not have known that while it was happening. You know it now, on this hill, in this light, with the rifles below continuing their patient mechanical work. 2 years of grief that called itself conviction. The conviction was real. The grief underneath it was also real. A man can carry both without knowing which is which, and only the ending sorts them. What they will make of you afterward, you cannot know this, but something in you suspects it anyway. They will need you to be mythic, because myth is how a culture digests what it cannot otherwise metabolize. The defeat will be reframed as sacrifice. The obsolescence will be reframed as noble resistance. Future men who were not there will speak of this hillside as the place where the samurai spirit proved itself by choosing death over surrender. And that will be true, and it will also be incomplete in a way that incompleteness always is when it serves a story. What will be harder for them to hold is this. You knew. You were not deceived. You understood what the rifles meant, and you came anyway, and the reason you came was not because you believed you could win, but because you did not know how to be the version of yourself that chose not to come. There is a self that exists inside a practice for long enough that the practice is not what you do. It is what you are. You could not have walked away from this and still been the thing the practice made. That is not a failure of reason. That is the cost of having been genuinely formed by something rather than merely trained in it. The men who walked away were not wrong. You are not wrong. There are two ways to be faithful to what a life means, and they pointed in opposite directions on this particular morning, and both directions were honest. The sword is still in your hand. The hillside is still beneath your feet. The sound of the rifles below is continuous now, no longer spaced, just a density of noise that your body has stopped trying to parse individually. You are thinking, of all things, about the weight. Not the weight of the sword that is familiar, that has been in your hand for so long it is below sensation. The weight of the morning itself, the specific gravity of a moment that you understand to be final. It is not heavy the way you expected. It is almost light, as if the full comprehension of an ending removes something from it rather than adding to it. You spent years carrying the dread of what you could feel coming, and now that it is here, the dread is gone because dread is anticipatory and there is nothing left to anticipate. There is only this, the grass, the light, your men behind you, the valley below. Your hands, which do not look like hands anymore after this many years. The sword, hand roughed and calloused and slightly wrong-shaped from the grip that has been in some version the same grip since you were 17 on a different hillside, learning what your body could become. The world changed. You did not. That is not a failure. That is a life.